It's Wednesday, September 7th, 2022, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the studios in the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Kathy Kiley and Ernest Perry. On our program this week, Las Vegas police are looking for the person who killed a renowned Las Vegas Review-Journal reporter. His name is Jeff German, and we're learning even more about this case today.
But as I stand here tonight, equality and democracy are under assault.
We'll talk about the president's speech from last Thursday night, and
the Republican Party right now is led by a dishonest demagogue.
Why the reporter who offered up that next day coverage on CNN found himself out of a job by the end of the day. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well, but we're going to start with what's been happening in Jackson, Mississippi, where the water is flowing through the tanks and into people's homes again. And according to a news release from City Hall, most people should have normal water pressure. That wasn't the case just a few days ago, where as much as 80% of the population did not have access to safe, clean tap water, and a boil order still does remain in place there. This is reminiscent in so many ways of the Flint water crisis, and it seems like municipalities aren't learning from what happened there.
Yeah, they've had water problems for a generation in Jackson, Mississippi, and it all boils down to they just don't have the tax base to support the normal infrastructure that a city is supposed to have, mainly because most of the tax base has moved outside of the city to the surrounding area, and really what this is a classic white flight. So a lot of those high paying jobs, a lot of the big businesses, they've all moved out. The tax base drops. They don't have the money to pay for water, streets, police, fire, all of those things. And basically what happened is the whole thing shut down. And to a certain extent, I think the city was basically saying, or at least the city officials were saying, look, there's nothing else we can do. We just don't have the funds. We can't get it from the federal government. We can't get it from the state. We don't have the tax base.
That, I think, is a key.
And there you go.
And I think that's something that other states and municipalities could learn from. I think what you're seeing a lot, and the Washington Post, I thought, did a really good analysis of this over the weekend, where they talked about white flight then begets the flight of middle-class blacks. Right. Because if you want to live a decent lifestyle and you have the money to move, you are going to do that.
Well, decent lifestyle, access to water isn't even decent lifestyle. That's basic life sustaining.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the point of the story was that one of the reasons they have lost access now, and it's now catastrophic, is because the state legislature there refused to provide the funds. And I think we see this over and over again in states where the urban centers become whipping boys, and large areas of the state that are agricultural or rural and feel like they're not benefiting will then say no. And I think
it's even more so than that. I mean, what happens is you have these suburban corridors around these areas that of where the tax base has moved to.
Exactly.
They have the funds, they have the schools, they have the water, they have the nice roads, and this is where people move to. So they can say, I live in Jackson, Mississippi, but in fact, you live in the suburbs around Jackson, Mississippi. You see the same thing in St. Louis. You see it happen in Kansas City. It happens in Dallas. It happens in a lot of these municipalities where the city proper doesn't have the resources that the surrounding areas have, but people claim that they live in those areas. They live in that city.
So CBS News, among others, also quickly jumped onto the racial makeup of this community, Jackson, the city itself being predominantly black. We talk about the need for climate change reporting, but environmental justice, how does that figure into the picture as well?
It fits in there hugely. I mean, we have one of our colleagues right now who's Christina Michelon is down on the Gulf Coast doing research on this very topic. The fact that it's not just a natural environmental that is impacting these communities, but it's also man-made environmental impacts it's having, where you have the chemical companies that are moving into or established next to communities of color. Same thing in Jackson, Mississippi, where you have a lot of these communities of color, or the whole entire 80% of the city of Jackson, are dealing with these same sorts of issues from a water standpoint. So those communities are in areas that you have man-made environmental impact that has a devastating effect on their everyday lives.
Well, and it's part of it is saying we're not all on the same ship, USS America. We're not all getting there. And I will say, from a journalist standpoint, I think it was very unintentional, but I think we as journalists fed into that a little bit, because post-Watergate, everybody needed a scalp, everybody wanted to be Woodstein. And so sometimes I think we created scandals where there weren't scandals, and so now everybody's saying they're all crooks, they're all terrible, and nobody is willing to trust each other enough to say, we have to compromise, we have to have faith in each other, we have to believe that if we provide better water service for the big city in our area, all of us are going to be better off, because those big cities are the economic engines that everybody else relies on.
But there's more to it than that, though. You also have this not in my backyard. So when a company comes in and they want to build somewhere, it's much easier for them to build in these communities, because these communities don't have the political power that another community will have. And they say, okay, we will allow you to build it here. But if they wanted to build it in, say, one of those suburban areas, that community would rise up and put political pressure on those who are making a decision not to build
And
there.
not just the political power, but the economic power as
Absolutely.
well. And so that they're going to communities that are going to offer them tax breaks, because they're going to come in, they're going to bring jobs, and therefore we're going to cut them a deal on property tax or whatever the taxes might be to even establish
As long
there.
as it's not in my backyard,
Right.
it's in somebody else's.
Exactly. And when they're not paying the property taxes, there goes the infrastructure at the same
Right.
time, because it's an evil cycle.
Right.
Thursday night, President Biden's so-called Soul of the Nation speech from Philadelphia. Did you watch it?
I
read about it.
I read about it. I saw some snippets of it.
Okay, so I was watching on MSNBC mainly because I knew that I'd find it. I was doing some other things around the house and wasn't wanting to play remote control jockey trying to find it. But what I found out after the fact was it wasn't quite so well broadcast. It wasn't out there as much as maybe some people had thought it would be. The network skipping it, claiming that it was a political speech, and instead chose to run sitcoms.
I'm not really surprised by that part of it, especially in the way in which the White House previewed it, and a lot of the things that he was talking about, and especially in the current political climate where you have differing definitions of democracy and freedom and all of those patriotic
and we're 60
slogans.
days out from an election.
Exactly.
So I think, that's a typical, and I think Ernest is right. All of the signals that the White House gave were that this was going to be a very political speech. So, consider the context we're in.
So how did this end up getting covered when you were talking about how you were writing or reading about it? How was it written? How did some of that language and choice of language come across in terms of conveying the political?
Well, I think what you saw most journalists, I think, yoked together two speeches that he gave in the same week. One a day or two before, which was overtly political. It was at a campaign style rally, and then this one, which was styled as a more serious kind of presidential
Address
speech.
to the nation.
But the themes were very much the same. And really, these are the themes that Joe Biden has been hitting since his inauguration. He brought this up at the very beginning, saying that he believes democracy is in danger worldwide, and particularly at the home front. So these are not really new themes, I think. But again, it's coming in a context that is so highly politicized. I think it's really hard for the president to get the nation's attention right now.
Yeah, and I think you're right on that point. I mean, I think part of what we're seeing is that you have the two sides, those who are really engaged in the politics, both on the left and the right, are in a pitched battle. And with the Republicans, they're in a pitched battle within their own party, trying to figure out what to do. And the Democrats are to a certain extent. But there's a large swath of the middle, shall we say, they're just tired of it. They moved on to, I found a streaming service. You know, the NFL is coming back in. The baseball playoffs are about to start. My kids are back in school. I got so many other things to do. I'm tired of the Trump this, Biden that, you know, left, right. I'm checking out. And my fear is that it's going to have an impact on the midterm elections, where people are just tired of it and they're going to choose to sit out on both sides.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is, I think this was largely by the president a sop to his own party. I mean, Joe Biden is not a conflict guy. He is a compromise guy. And but he is under pressure from his own party to get out there and be as rough and tough and as brash as the other side, which I'm not sure is really the best way to respond to that kind of. But it's hard. It's very difficult and it's very tempting. And I think he's under tremendous pressure from the Democrats to give back as good as he's getting.
But it does provide content for the cable news networks the build up toward the election. And I think this Biden, again, like you're saying, playing to his base, want to be in that environment because that's what's going to be happening within the next 60 days.
So there you have it. The day after coverage cost at least one reporter his job. Take a listen to this snippet. You're about to hear the voice of John Harwood.
These are not honest disagreements. The Republican Party right now is led by a dishonest demagogue. Many, many Republicans are rallying behind his lies about the 2020 election and other things as well. And a significant portion or a sufficient portion of the constituency that they're leading attacked the Capitol on January 6th violently by offering pardons or suggesting pardons for those people who violently attacked the Capitol, which you've been pointing out numerous times this morning. Donald Trump made Joe Biden's point for him.
So a few minutes after that live shot on CNN, Harwood tweeted that it would be his last day at the cable network, finding out after he had said that he was among the latest on-air staffers to be released from their contract before it was over.
Are we sure he found out before
that's what
or after?
I was going to ask that same question.
I'm thinking that that was pretty much his parting
that was
shot.
His
exactly.
Yeah, that was his mic drop.
Exactly.
That was like, you know what?
Exactly.
Since I'm gone,
I don't have to eat lunch
here
in
you
this
go.
town.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
I fell for the company line. Fair enough.
I think he knew, and I think this was his parting shot. And I think, but on the more serious side, I think there is this is one of the ethical dilemmas we've been dealing with as journalists, where the question is, are we in an environment where the traditional neutrality is now actually collaborating with an assault on our democracy? And I think this is something that we talk about a lot in class. And I will say, as somebody who covered politics for many, many years, I went along in Congress and thought, well, you know, we have different ideas about how to get there, but we all agree on the same goals. We want more democracy and a more just society and a better world for our children. Events of recent years have caused me to profoundly question those assumptions. And I think if, as a journalist, you can't call out what you're seeing in a way that is truthful, you're not telling the truth. To quote one of my former colleagues at USA Today when we were doing an election post-mortem, balanced isn't always fair.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, and really, there was not much in his statement that has not been proven.
Exactly.
That was going to be my next question. I actually went and looked up the word demagogue in the dictionary as I was writing yesterday to be like, well, what did he say that wasn't
Donald
true?
Trump's picture could be next to that.
Yeah, what did he say that wasn't actually true?
And my guess is that he's been in news meetings at CNN for probably the last 5 years, if not more, basically saying the same argument. And that was his ability to be able to say what he said in those news arguments to the public live, because he's right. I mean, they did attack the Capitol. We all saw it. And there's footage of it available for anybody to see on any streaming platform or internet access you have. You can see that. The fact that the former president has, as recently as 2 days ago, trotted out that the election was rigged, the FBI is after me, this sort of thing. So he didn't really say anything that hasn't that isn't based in fact.
Okay, we're going to talk about a couple of other things now. Let's move online and talk about something happening over at Twitter and something else at Amazon. Amazon first, where this weekend the streaming service saw its biggest ever premiere for Lord of the Rings of Power. But get this, they put up a 3-day delay on all reviews of that show to be able to root out bots that were trying to, kind of like those fake reviews you would see on Yelp, to try and either give away spoilers or to try and decrease audiences. Kind of feels like maybe they figured out the way to kill the internet troll.
Yeah, a little bit they figured it out, because I mean there are other places that people were able to get that, but I think it's ingenious. Whether or not it's something that's ethical, I'm not so sure.
Talk about where you think the ethics could be a problem.
Well,
there.
I mean, if you're going to put it out there, I mean, every other movie, be it streamed or showed up in theaters or run over the air, they put it out there and let people make the decision on their own, and it's almost like they're trying to manipulate, what people's thoughts are on it, even if it is a troll.
Okay.
But in the event, in your effort to get the troll, you may have also inhibited someone who has.
Well, I think the idea though is it's more the equity issue. If you're going to do it for your movie, what about somebody else's movie?
Or somebody else's movie that you happen to be running.
Okay.
Exactly.
How would it be different though? And I guess maybe you just answered this, but how would it be really different though than if we were to run a story on one of our news websites that had commenting on it and moderated those comments?
That's like the old days with letters to the editor, where you actually called people and made sure they were. I mean, I think what we're moving to is a more curated, moderated kind of experience.
And you can still have the marketplace of ideas. You can still have a terms of service about what's acceptable to be commented or not. But if you can tell that it's literally spam or that it's not an actual account holder that's like a real person that could answer a CAPTCHA.
Yeah, well, I think where people get confused here, everybody has a right to their opinion. And everybody has a right to say what they want to say. That doesn't mean you have the right to be published on the World Wide Web.
That's right.
These are private purveyors, private platforms. If you want to go and stand on a soapbox, there's a circle up here at the University of Missouri, and you can speak to your heart's content. But that doesn't mean you have the right to be published. And I think platform providers have to grow up and understand that and take responsibility for what's on their platforms.
Right. All I say is be transparent about what you're doing.
Absolutely, and be equitable.
Yes.
Okay. So Twitter, they announced the other day, people there announced the other day, that it may finally be giving users that edit button that they've been begging for.
Oh, thank you.
15 years later. Now, not everybody is going to get access to it. It's going to start with paid accounts. And their idea is that the people who would have the edit button would be using it for the sake of correcting typos, correcting words that are left out. I mean, we've all done that when we're tweeting quickly. But there's an interesting question that was posed by somebody on one of the pieces on our links blog about how that edit button could actually be used in a way that removes some of that transparency you're talking about. When you think about how Twitter has become the go-to for politicians, for government agencies to reach an audience directly, that the minute there's something that's posted, it could happen with celebrities too, but the minute there's something posted that has backlash associated with it, that they can go back, edit it, and make it disappear. I mean, there's always the screenshot, right? Like, it's probably never actually going to, but this
and there's the
button,
Internet Archive.
There is, but this edit button may not be the great savior of typos that people are
Well,
saying
it will be
could
the great savior of typos. I do think the person who wrote in on the blog has a really good point. That yes, it could. Just like, believe me, I've seen transcripts of the congressional debates at times. Not so much congressional debates, but we've had transcripts of the speakers' press conferences changed and edited. So, yes, people do that when they realize they've made a blooper. But when I worked years ago for an organization called the Sunlight Foundation, we had a service called Politwoops. And it was piggybacked on a Danish service. And we would actually archive politicians' tweets for just exactly that reason. So we could go back and say, well, no, actually you said this. And so I think and we would archive deleted tweets for that reason. So I think people will go back to that. And I would argue that for politicians, it's fair game because they are public figures.
Yeah, and celebrities as well. I mean, I think that it will open up, I guess, another business for someone who is going to say, as soon as they get it, they're going to archive it. And then when someone
scrape immediately and always be archiving,
and soon as someone says, well, that's not what my Twitter feed says, they'll go back and say, well, it did say that.
I can
before
tell you from
edited
experience,
it.
it can be done with the right coders.
Right,
yes.
Right.
Well, we have some sad news to talk about, and this has actually been developing really even as we sat down today. The staff of the Las Vegas Review-Journal is mourning one of its own. Jeff German was found dead with stab wounds outside of his home on Saturday morning. Police released images of a suspect and say that this stabbing stemmed from a fight that German had with another individual on Friday. Neighbors, according to reporting yesterday in the Review-Journal, had said that this appeared to have been a crime of opportunity, but we were learning just as we were sitting down today that perhaps investigators are going in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, this is quite a story. It indicates that one of the people of interest is a politician that Jeff German was doing some pretty critical reporting about. So it's really a shocker, I think, and it's disturbing, to say the least. The idea that the police have now searched the home of this politician, and that, according to the story in the Las Vegas paper, there were reporters who saw a vehicle similar to one that was seen at the scene of the crime at the time of the crime, in the presence of this politician. So this is a unfolding story, but wow. If we've gotten to that point in the United States, it's scary indeed.
Yeah. And of course, this report, he's a 40-year career. Mm-hmm. He's covered a lot of politicians. He's covered a lot of casino owners. He's covered the mob in Las Vegas. So I'm sure that he probably had his share of people who didn't necessarily like some of the things that he was reporting, in particular this politician that you just pointed out, who is now in the police investigation. So, but this is unusual. I mean, most either whether you're talking about casino, or you're talking about mob bosses, or even politicians, don't go to this extreme, because this brings law enforcement in and investigation. So if there is something here, it could be really damaging to the politician if he's involved in some way. But it also brings up the point of press freedom again. I mean, the ability to be able to do your job without the fear of losing your life. I mean, that's
well, and normally we talk about this in the context of other countries,
right.
But the fact that we see something like this in our own country is really disturbing, and it's hard not to link it with some of the really harsh and over-the-top rhetoric that a lot of politicians are now engaging in against the press. You know, we are an institution. People agree with us, they disagree with us, we make mistakes sometimes, but we are called the Fourth Estate for a reason. We're pretty important to keeping an eye on democracy. And when we start to question all of our democratic institutions, we really have to wonder what the future holds.
Right.
Kathy, you had said this also reminded you of a case from decades ago.
Yes. Don Bowles, who was another reporter who had done a lot of highly in-depth investigative reporting in Arizona, and his death really galvanized the investigative reporters and editors, an organization that is headquartered here at the University of Missouri. And I think really what IRE did after Bowles's death, which was to go flood the zone in Arizona and say, you can take out the reporter, but you can't take out the story. We are seeing that over and over again globally because there's a great organization in France called Forbidden Stories that's really used the IRE as a model. And I think it's so important for us to support our colleagues, whether they're in Las Vegas or Arizona or Afghanistan or Niger or Turkey, because this is really, we're in a world war. In most places, thank God, bullets aren't being expended, but we're really in a world war on freedom of press, freedom of thought, and democracy.
Yeah, and it does have it can have a chilling effect on journalism. I mean, because journalists will really stop and think, okay, I really want to? Yeah, is my life worth this story?
Yeah.
Is my family's life worth this story?
Is my job worth this story?
Yeah, is my job worth this story? I mean, it might not be the journalist who's covering it. It could be the organization that he or she is working for that says, well, whoa, wait a minute, this is a threat to our organization as a whole. Maybe we're going to back off of this story.
We can't afford the legal bills. Even if we're right, if we're going to win, we can't afford the legal bills. So
we can't afford what the damage that it's going to cause to our reputation if the public decides to go with the person that's attacking us as opposed to us out there doing our jobs and printing the truth.
Yeah, and I think the systematic undermining of the press as an institution is opening the door for this kind of censorship and self-censorship. And I think it's not just a problem for reporters. It is a problem for our society and for citizens because, and if we don't have the support of people who aren't journalists, we're in a world of hurt.
Right.
Okay. Before we go, I want to make sure we take a moment to give a mention to the biggest sports story of the week, Serena Williams' final match at the U.S. Open and what she's calling her evolution into the next phase of her life. The legacy that this woman brings to the sport, her impact on tennis, on women's sports.
It's huge, and the fact that she was allowed to give this sort of send off at the U.S. Open, which is where she pretty much made her name. So when you think about the U.S. Open, you think about Serena in the same way that you would think about Arthur Ashe or John McEnroe and that sort of thing. So the fact that she was able to do this at that venue and in that spotlight and bring in all of the celebrities and politicians who saw her as someone who pretty much put tennis back on the map, especially women's tennis back on the map, but also as someone who is seen as a figure to emulate by women and young girls all over the world.
You say something interesting there, that she put tennis back on the map. Because one of the things I was reading too was that Serena Williams is credited with forcing journalists to look at tennis as more than a game. And my first thought was, well, what about Billie Jean King? Like, hasn't women's tennis kind of had that legacy?
Well, for her generation.
Okay.
I mean, for her generation.
Okay,
you did
so that
have Billie
back
Jean
on the
King,
map thing
you
is
had Martina Navratilova, you had Chris Evert, and then you had Serena and Venus Williams. I mean, so
well, and I think she was so dominant as an athlete. Not only was she dominant as an athlete, but she has a tremendous charisma. And so I think not every athlete, there can be great athletes who don't have that kind of charisma, but she was, and I like her phrase about evolving. I'm going to steal that one. But I do think, she will be in the public eye long after her tennis career is over because she is more than a tennis player.
Right.
Okay.
And sports writers are going to miss her a lot.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for spending the last half hour with us today. We're out of time, but do remind you that you can follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA, and you can find us wherever you get your podcast downloads. I'd like to thank RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, to Kyle Felling for handling the audio, and Tim Pilcher for composing our theme music.